I first noticed the photograph on a Tuesday morning, tucked neatly beneath my phone on the nightstand. It was a Polaroid, slightly curled at the edges, the kind that developed instantly. The image showed my bed, dimly lit by the weak blue glow of my digital alarm clock. My blanket was pulled up to my chest, my face relaxed in sleep. The angle was strange, slightly above my head, as if whoever took it was leaning over me. I sat up, pulse sluggish with sleep but mind sharp with unease. No one had been in my apartment last night. My door was locked. My windows latched. I checked my phone's call log, my messages. Nothing. My security app showed no motion detected outside my door. I even flicked through my gallery, as if the image might have magically appeared on my phone as well. It hadn't. I forced a breath, running a hand through my hair. Maybe it was some sort of prank. Maybe I took it myself, half asleep, and just didn't remember. The thought was flimsy, but I clung to it. I went about my day, shoving the photo into my desk drawer and pushing the gnawing discomfort to the back of my mind. The next morning, there was another one. Same angle. Same dim glow from my clock. But this time, something had changed. The blanket was a little lower, my shoulders more exposed. My face looked different. I couldn't explain it at first. The expression was still neutral, my body still in sleep's grip, but there was a subtle tension to my features. My lips, usually relaxed, had curled ever so slightly upward. A grin. A small, involuntary twitch of a grin. I ran my fingers over the surface of the photograph. It was real. Tangible. I turned my apartment upside down that morning, checked every window, every closet. I dragged my nightstand aside, crouched to look beneath the bed, flipped my mattress as if some hidden camera might be embedded inside. Nothing. I was alone. Or at least, I should have been. That night, I forced myself to stay awake. I brewed coffee, parked myself at my desk, and kept my eyes locked on my bedroom door. I left the lights on, my phone clutched in my hand. My ears strained for any sign of intrusion. Sometime around 3 a.m., my eyelids betrayed me. My head drooped forward. Just for a second. Only a second. When I startled awake again, my phone's screen was dim, my muscles stiff from the awkward position. My heart leapt into my throat. I lurched toward my nightstand. The photograph was already there. And this time, I was staring directly into the camera. I hadn't even gotten out of the chair. My coffee sat cold beside me, and the TV I'd left on for background noise was flickering with static. I don't remember falling asleep. I swear, I was awake. But there it was. This time, the photo showed me sitting exactly where I was, slumped forward in the chair, my head tilted at an unnatural angle, eyes half-lidded like I drifted off mid-sentence. And I was smiling. Not a subtle twitch. Not the faint, sleep-induced curl from the night before. This was different, wider, strained. My lips stretched too thin, my teeth barely visible, like the grin was forced onto my face rather than formed by it. I stared at the photograph until my vision blurred, then forced myself to move. I grabbed my phone and checked the security app. No alerts. I scrubbed through the footage from my door cam. Nothing. No motion. No sound. Just the faint hum of the hallway light flickering outside. I tore through my apartment again. I checked behind every piece of furniture, opened every cabinet, even pried open the air vents. My hands were shaking, sweat cold on my back despite the heater humming. Nothing. The locks were untouched. The windows sealed. I was alone. And yet, someone, or something, had been close enough to take my picture. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair, clutching a cheap metal flashlight I'd found in the kitchen drawer. Not much of a weapon, but it felt better than nothing. I positioned myself so I could see the bedroom door, the windows, even the narrow hallway leading to the bathroom. I waited. The hours dragged, thick and heavy. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator cycling on and off. Shadows shifted as the streetlights outside flickered, but nothing moved inside. until I blinked. Just once. When my eyes opened again, my flashlight was on the floor, rolling slightly as if it had just been dropped. My neck ached from the weight of my own head. My phone buzzed softly on the nightstand, screen lighting up with a notification I didn't remember setting. A new photo. It was there. Another Polaroid, perfectly placed beside my phone like the others. This one was different. I wasn't in bed, and I wasn't sitting in the chair. The photo showed me standing in the middle of the room, facing the camera directly. My head was tilted slightly to the side, my eyes wide open, staring. But the worst part wasn't the expression. It was my hand. In the photo, I was holding something. A Polaroid camera. My thumb hovered over the shutter button. The photograph sat on the nightstand like it was mocking me, its glossy surface catching the dim glow of my bedside lamp. I must have stared at it for hours, my mind stuck in a loop, trying to untangle the impossible. I was holding the camera. I took the photo. But I had no memory of it. No gaps in my night, aside from that brief blink, if that's even what it was. At some point, my exhaustion tipped into something else. Not sleep, but a foggy, jittery haze. My body felt detached, my hands trembling with fine tremors as I paced the apartment, trying to make sense of it. I checked every drawer, every cabinet again, this time looking for a camera. I didn't own one. I never had. By morning, the apartment felt claustrophobic, like the walls had inched closer overnight. I left without even showering, shoving the photos into a drawer as if that would keep them from following me. The cold air outside slapped me awake, but it didn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, not just with the photos, but with me. At work, I was a ghost. My coworkers' voices faded into background noise, their words slipping past me like static. I caught my reflection in the office window around noon. And I froze. There it was. The grin. Faint, just a twitch at the corners of my mouth, like the muscles were pulling on their own. I forced my face neutral, but the tension lingered beneath the skin, like a cramp I couldn't stretch out. I left early. No one seemed to notice. Back home, the apartment felt colder than it should have been. I double-checked the thermostat, normal. But the air had that stale, too still quality, like no one had breathed in it for days. The drawer where I'd shoved the photos was slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it like that. I stood there for a long moment, my pulse pounding in my ears, before finally pulling the drawer open. There was a new photo. It hadn't been there this morning. This one was closer, an extreme close-up of my face. My eyes were half-lidded, unfocused, and my mouth was stretched wide in that unnatural grin, the skin around my cheeks pulled taut, almost painful looking. But the worst part wasn't the grin. It was my eyes. In the photo, they weren't looking at the camera. They were looking past it. Directly at something behind whoever, or whatever, was taking the picture. I felt it then. A shift in the room. Not a sound, not a shadow. Just a presence. I spun around, heart racing, expecting, I don't know what, but there was nothing. Just the empty apartment. And yet, the air felt thick, pressing against me like invisible hands. I didn't sleep that night either. I stayed awake for 48 hours straight. The first day was manageable, coffee, pacing, adrenaline. But the second day, that's when things started to slip. My reflection became unreliable. I'd catch glimpses of myself in windows or mirrors, but something always felt off. Like my reflection was a second behind, lagging just enough to be noticeable. Sometimes, I wasn't smiling in real life, but the reflection was. Not wide. Just a faint twitch at the corners of my mouth. Like it was trying to show me something I wasn't ready to see. By the third night, my apartment felt like a stranger's. The walls seemed darker, the silence heavier. The air had weight, pressing in on me like something unseen had taken up residence here. And then, my TV turned on by itself. A sharp burst of static. Loud, crackling, too sudden. I jumped, heart hammering, my breath freezing in my chest. The screen was pure white noise, the kind that used to show up on old televisions when a signal was lost. But this wasn't a lost signal. Something was moving in the static. Not shapes. Not faces. Just a deep ripple in the distortion. Like something was behind it, pressing against the screen, shifting just below the surface. I reached for the remote, my fingers stiff and trembling. The second I touched it, the screen blinked. The static cut out, replaced by a live feed. A grainy, black and white view of a room. My room. The angle was high, like a security camera I had never installed. I watched, paralyzed, as the feed showed me sitting in my chair, staring at the television. Exactly as I was right now. I lifted my hand. The me in the feed lifted his hand, perfectly synchronized. For a split second, I almost convinced myself it was just a delayed reflection, some sort of camera feedback glitch. But then, the me on the screen turned his head. Slowly, deliberately, looking past the camera, looking at something else in the room with him. But in my apartment, here, in reality, I hadn't moved. I gasped, staggering back from the TV, heart slamming into my ribs. My skin prickled, my entire body screaming run, 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 but I couldn't move. The me in the feed stood up. I didn't. I was still frozen, locked in place, watching as the figure on the screen moved toward the camera. Step. By. Step. The image flickered. His face was in shadow, blurry, wrong, but I knew it was me. Then, just before he reached the camera, the screen went black. The entire apartment fell into a suffocating silence. The TV didn't turn off, it just stopped broadcasting anything. A dead, empty void. I stood there, breathing too fast, my pulse roaring in my ears. My fingers twitched toward my phone, desperate to check the time, to ground myself in something real. But then, the screen lit up again. Just one sentence, glowing in the darkness. Don't look behind you. I didn't. I couldn't. But I felt it. The air shifted behind me. The weight of something else in the room. The sensation of being watched, not from the screen this time, but from right behind my head. I squeezed my eyes shut. My breathing was a thin, wheezing thing. I forced my shaking legs to move, to carry me toward the bedroom, away from whatever was standing there. I shut the door, locked it, and sat in the corner, my knees to my chest, staring at my reflection in the closet mirror. I needed to stay awake. I couldn't risk blinking. I stayed in the corner for hours. Maybe longer. I wasn't sure. Time felt warped, stretched too thin, like I was trapped in the slow, crawling moments before something bad happens. My breath came in shallow bursts. My ears strained for any sound, any shift in the air that might tell me I wasn't alone in this room. I was too afraid to move. Too afraid to look. The message on the TV still burned in my mind. Don't look behind you. But I was in my bedroom now, behind a locked door. The weight of that unseen thing from the living room still pressed against my senses, but it wasn't here. It couldn't be here. Unless, I swallowed hard, throat dry as paper. My hands clenched around my phone, knuckles white. I needed to check the time, to ground myself. I forced myself to glance down at the screen. 3:03 a.m. My chest tightened. That was the same time the security feed had flickered last night. I turned the phone over, not wanting to see it anymore. And that's when I noticed the mirror. The closet door was closed, but the tall mirror on the front of it reflected most of the room. The bed. The nightstand. Me. And something else. I felt it before I saw it. That deep, heavy certainty that something was wrong in the reflection. Slowly, as if my own body wasn't even listening to me anymore, I lifted my eyes to the glass. And I saw it. There were two of me. One huddled in the corner, me. The real me. And one standing in the middle of the room, facing away from me. I stopped breathing. The second me wasn't a reflection. It wasn't mirroring me at all. It was standing independently, inside the mirror. The other me was taller, stretched somehow. Its limbs too long, its neck too thin, as if something had tried to recreate me but got the proportions all wrong. And its head was tilted backward. Not turned, tilted, bending the wrong way, almost upside down, its chin jutting toward the ceiling at an impossible angle. I felt bile rise in my throat, my stomach recoiling from the sheer wrongness of it. Then, it moved. A slow, jerky twitch, like it was just noticing me. It lifted a hand. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The hand pressed against the inside of the mirror. Fingertips smeared against the glass, as if it was testing the barrier. Then, without turning its head back around, its mouth opened. And the grin stretched wide. Wider than anything human. The sound that came out wasn't words. It was a dry, rasping wheeze. Like something trying to breathe through a broken throat. I snapped. My body moved on instinct, shoving me backward, away from the mirror, slamming into the nightstand hard enough to knock the lamp over. Glass shattered. The room plunged into darkness. And for a second, just a second, I swore I heard movement. A scrape of skin against the floor. Something shifting, adjusting, getting out. I fumbled for my phone, hands slick with sweat. My thumb mashed against the flashlight button, and the beam of light cut through the dark. The mirror was empty. The thing inside was gone. The bedroom door was still locked. The walls were still the same. Everything looked normal. But it wasn't. I felt it wasn't. I wasn't alone anymore. Something had gotten out. And it was still in the room with me. I remained still. The air inside the room felt altered, heavier, as though it had thickened into something I wasn't meant to breathe. There was no sound except the faint hum of my phone's screen, still glowing in my hand. The light from it cast sharp, fractured shadows across the floor, but it wasn't strong enough to reach the far corners of the room. I couldn't see everything. I didn't need to. I knew something was here. There was no logic to it, no confirmation, no solid proof beyond the twisting pressure in my chest, but I knew. I could sense a presence, not in the way you hear a person enter a room, but in the way your instincts recoil before your mind understands why. I checked my phone again. 3:03 a.m. The same time as before. The exact moment everything had started shifting. The television had told me not to turn around. And I had listened. My body urged me to move, to grab the door handle and run, but I stayed put because I recognized the threat. I had seen glimpses of it already. Something had left the mirror, something had crossed into this world, and it was still here with me. I hadn't seen its face, but I understood its intent. It was watching, waiting, learning. And then, a sound. A slow, deliberate movement. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't breathing. It was the unmistakable noise of skin dragging against wood. The sound was neither distant nor close. It was somewhere behind me, shifting along the floor, as if something was crawling, adjusting, testing its weight against this world. It was not approaching, but it was not still either. It was moving carefully, purposefully, a silent observer rehearsing its next action. It wasn't just here, it was copying me. I didn't know if it had existed before I saw the first Polaroid, or if the act of looking at myself, studying my own face, my own body, had given it the shape it needed to enter my world. But it was watching me now. And it was still building itself. I realized then that it wasn't hiding. It was waiting for me to see it. It was still unfinished, still incomplete, still guessing at what it was supposed to be. It was taking its time, shaping itself carefully, following every move I made so that when I finally turned, when I finally acknowledged it, it would be indistinguishable. If I ran, it would run. If I spoke, it would speak. If I looked, it would become me. I felt sick. I couldn't follow its rules. I had to disrupt the pattern. I forced my fingers to release the door handle, letting my arm drop back to my side. The movement wasn't much, but it felt like a risk. I had been following an invisible script, and now I was breaking it. Then, slowly, I did something I would not expect. I sat down. The sound behind me stopped. The air inside the room shifted. The presence faltered, confused, as if it was hesitating, uncertain of how to respond. I had done something that did not fit within the framework it had been constructing, something that did not align with the pattern it had been following. I had stepped outside of its plan. For the first time, it did not know what to do next. The weight in my chest was unbearable now. My breath came slow and shallow, my pulse thrumming beneath my skin. I could not turn my head to check the mirror, but I no longer needed to. I could feel it there, lurking just beyond my field of vision, waiting for me to give it form. I needed to break it further. I forced my voice to work, though my throat felt dry and raw. "What do you want?" Silence. The weight in the room pressed down harder. Then, a voice. My own voice. Right beside my ear. "I want to sleep." I inhaled sharply, but I did not move. The voice was not quite right. It had no tone, no warmth, no human inflection. It was a perfect imitation of my voice, but there was nothing behind it. It had spoken because I had spoken. It had answered because it was learning how. And then, a touch. Fingers. Cold, dry, lacking any real texture, as if they were just the idea of skin rather than something real. They ran along my cheek, feather-light, as if testing the boundaries of my existence. And then, darkness. It was not sleep. It was not unconsciousness. It was something else entirely, something deeper, something that did not feel like a state of mind, but rather a shift in reality itself. The room did not exist anymore. The floor was no longer beneath me. And the last thing I felt, before the world ceased to be, was its fingers curling under my jaw. I woke up in the dark. Or at least, I thought I did. There was no bed beneath me, no floor, no weight pressing against my body to ground me in reality. I existed in a space where my body felt distant, almost disconnected, as though I had been lifted from it. There was no ceiling, no walls, just a deep, endless void that stretched in all directions. I wasn't floating. I wasn't falling. I was simply here. And I wasn't alone. A faint light flickered in the distance. It wasn't a bulb, not fire, not anything natural. It was something else, something artificial, like the sickly glow of a television screen left on in an empty room. It pulsed, slow and rhythmic, as if breathing. I turned toward it, even though I never actually moved. The light grew closer, shapes began to form in the darkness. The walls of a room, my room. The bed, the nightstand, the broken lamp, the mirror on the closet door. But something was off. The details weren't right. The walls weren't the same shade. The furniture was arranged slightly wrong. The room looked like a memory of my apartment, like someone had tried to reconstruct it from fragmented recollections but hadn't gotten everything correct. I took a step forward. My legs obeyed, but they felt strange, like they weren't entirely mine anymore. The air in this place was thick, heavy with the sensation of being watched, and I knew where to look before my eyes even landed on it. The mirror. There was no light source, but the mirror reflected something anyway. And I was in it. But not just me. The other me. It stood there, inside the glass, staring at me with the same tired, sunken eyes. But it wasn't perfectly still. Its head tilted slightly, just off from the way I was standing. Its fingers twitched, hovering just away from the surface. And it was smiling. I wasn't. I swallowed, my breath uneven. The figure inside the mirror had followed me here. Or worse. I had followed it. I took a step closer, and the reflection did the same, mirroring me. But something in my chest tightened. I could feel it now, the same rawness I had sensed when I first saw those Polaroids. That thing inside the glass, it wasn't me. Not completely. And then it spoke. "Did you sleep well?" It was my voice. perfectly my voice. But it carried no weight, no emotion, no depth. The words existed, but there was nothing behind them. I tried to respond, but my throat felt constricted, my body uncooperative. My breath hitched, but the thing in the mirror breathed in sync with me. I clenched my fists. "What do you want?" The words came out hoarse, but the reflection didn't repeat them this time. It only grinned wider. The edges of its mouth stretched just a little too far, the muscles pulling in a way mine never could. It lifted its hand. I didn't. It wasn't mirroring me anymore. Its fingers pressed against the inside of the glass, and the surface rippled like water. A wave of nausea rolled through me. The air shifted again, and suddenly, I understood what was happening. It had spent so long copying me, watching me, mimicking every movement, every expression, every breath. And now it was finished. It had learned enough. The rippling stopped. The thing's head tilted further, its grin splitting wide. Then, in a single, fluid motion, it stepped out. I staggered backward, my pulse roaring in my ears. The figure, my figure, was no longer in the mirror. It was here, with me. It didn't lunge. It didn't attack. It just stood there, staring. I felt my body shake, a cold sweat breaking out along my spine. My voice came out in a whisper. "What are you?" The thing's mouth twitched, as if amused. Then it spoke again. "I am you now." And then, with slow, deliberate steps, it walked past me. I turned, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't watching me anymore. It wasn't hunting me. It was leaving. It was walking toward the door, toward the world outside, toward my life. I tried to move, to chase after it, to stop it, but my legs wouldn't obey. I looked down, and my feet weren't touching the floor anymore. I gasped, my fingers reaching toward my own body, but I was already fading. I turned toward the mirror. I was still there. Inside. The last thing I saw before the world closed around me was myself, stepping into the hallway, leaving me behind. The door shut behind it. I heard the sound, the latch clicking into place, the distant shuffle of footsteps moving down the hallway, and then silence. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. But I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I wasn't in the hallway, or the building, or anywhere that made sense. I was in the mirror. The realization hit me like cold water. I turned, my breath tight in my chest. The space around me wasn't just a reflection of my apartment. It was hollow. The walls stretched too far, the corners curved wrong. The air had a density to it, as if it weren't meant to be breathed. There was no exit. No door. No windows. The mirror was gone. I lunged forward anyway, pressing my hands against the glass-like surface, but there was nothing to push against. My palms met only air. I looked outward, past the space where the mirror had been, into the world I had been stolen from. The apartment was the same. The lamp was still broken, the bed still unmade, the TV screen still dark. But I wasn't in it anymore. It was there instead. My body. My face. My life. I watched as it turned its head from side to side, testing itself, rolling its shoulders, stretching its hands. I expected something unnatural, jittery movements, the wrong expressions, some hint that it wasn't truly human. But it was perfect. It had learned everything. The way I stood, the way I breathed, the way my muscles moved when I shifted my weight. It was seamless. I banged my fists against the invisible barrier. My voice came out in a hoarse, useless whisper. No. It didn't react. It didn't even look back. It took a slow breath, adjusting the collar of my shirt, smoothing out the wrinkles. Then, with steady, confident steps, it walked away. The panic inside me built into something desperate. I slammed my hands against the barrier, over and over, but I made no sound. I wasn't there anymore. I was nothing but a shadow. A thing behind glass. A forgotten imprint. And then I heard it. A distant, familiar sound. The door unlocking. Footsteps in the hallway. A voice. "Hey, man, you okay? You haven't been answering your phone." It was my coworker. They had come to check on me. I screamed. I yelled. I begged. But there was no sound. No one could hear me. I watched as it turned toward the door, smiled, and answered. "Yeah. Sorry. Just been tired." It laughed. It sounded exactly like me. It was me. And then, before leaving the apartment, before stepping out into my life completely, it turned, just for a second, and looked directly into the mirror. Looked directly at me. And it smiled. A knowing, final smile. As if to say, "I told you. I am you now." Then it walked out. The door shut. I was alone. No sound. No exit. No escape. I turned back toward the mirror. My reflection was still there. Trapped. And for the first time, I truly saw myself. A hollow shape. A thing left behind. And worst of all, I was smiling, too.